Just when you thought the news cycles might be slowing down and it was safe to look at the news again, well, I hate to break it to you. It turns out there's no such thing as slow news weekends anymore. I cannot imagine why. However, we do have some good news for a change.
I do want to take you out to some breaking news that we are following at this hour, as a federal appeals court has now upheld a $5 million verdict that E. Jean Carroll won against Donald Trump when a jury found the U.S. president-elect liable for sexually abusing and later defaming the former magazine columnist. The decision was issued by a 3-judge panel of the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Manhattan, and all of this information here is coming in from Reuters. Now, the May 2023 verdict stemmed from an incident around 1996 in a Bergdorf Goodman department store. It was in a dressing room there in Manhattan where Carroll said Trump raped her. And an October 2022 Truth Social post where Trump denied Carroll's claim as a hoax.
It's impossible to overstate the courage it took for E. Jean Carroll to bring this case. And remember, there's another one still going through the appeals process, which E. Jean also won with the help of the extraordinary attorney, Robbie Kaplan. In that case, Donald was found essentially liable for the same things, but he was there was an $83.3 million judgment made against him, which we're still waiting for him to have to pay E. Jean Carroll. But this is a victory. Let's savor it. And as for the sexual abuse claim, again, for his being found liable for sexual abuse, I want to quote Judge Kaplan here just to make clear what was really going on. Quote, the finding that Ms. Carroll failed to prove that she was, quote, raped within the meaning of the New York penal law does not mean that she failed to prove that Mr. Trump raped her, as many people commonly understand the word rape. Indeed, as the evidence at trial recounted below makes clear, the jury found that Mr. Trump, in fact, did exactly that, unquote. Hey, ABC, are you listening? Anyway, it's important to note that in both cases, Donald's denying of the charges rested on 2 separate claims. One, that he didn't know or had never met E. Jean Carroll. Okay, reasonable enough, I guess, if it weren't for all of the photographic evidence and if it weren't for the fact that in a photograph, he misidentified her as his second wife, Marla Maples. And then, of course, his claim that E. Jean Carroll was just not his type, which implies that if she had been, he absolutely would have raped her. Just also a reminder that over 70 million Americans elected an adjudicated rapist to be president of the United States. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but just a few days before the verdict or the appeal was denied, Donald posted this on his failing social media platform, Truth Social. Quote, should a woman go to jail for falsely accusing a man of rape? Read Truth if you want justice for Trump, unquote. Looks like there might be another defamation suit in his future. Before I keep going, I just want to say quickly, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and like and share our videos. Also, after you subscribe, hit the bell. That way you will be notified of all future episodes. It doesn't cost anything. It just takes 2 seconds. Okay, so as New York courts struggle and succeed, at least today, to hold Donald accountable for sexually abusing and defaming E. Jean Carroll, we have others like Governor Greg Abbott, fascist of Texas, doubling down on tactics that are kind of rooted in toxic masculinity for his own political gain. Take a look at this.
Texas governor is putting forward a new initiative in hopes of curbing illegal immigration. Governor Greg Abbott announcing that new effort is meant to deter migrants from crossing the border illegally.
Well, as you guys were just mentioning, deterring migrants and showing them the dangers and consequences of crossing the border illegally. That's the goal behind the governor's new plan, which consists of putting up billboards just on the other side of this wall.
These billboards, some of which you can see behind me, they tell the horror stories of human trafficking. One says many girls who try to migrate to Texas are kidnapped. Another sign says your wife and daughter will pay for their trip with their bodies.
Over 40 billboards will be put across El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico, especially around the U.S.-Mexico border.
I have to admit, I was a little confused when I first heard about this billboard campaign. It didn't really make sense to me, but just think about it in the context of the way the right uses fear as a weapon. During the election, during Donald's first administration, and then during this election, he and the Republican Party used fear to terrorize Americans into being absolutely terrified of undocumented workers in this country. Now, Abbott is trying to scare immigrants off before they even come to this country. And the billboards say things like, how much did you pay to get your daughter raped? Or many girls are raped by the coyotes you hire. Listen, there is a serious problem of sexual assault of migrant women and girls. Understandably, they're among the most vulnerable populations, but it is a bridge too far to assume that Greg Abbott gives a shit about women or their bodies. In Texas, abortion is essentially illegal. Women who are raped are forced to carry the rapist's children if they have the great misfortune of being impregnated by their rapist. So the idea that Greg Abbott cares at all about the lives of migrant women is just ridiculous, quite honestly. He has no interest in solving any of these problems. He only wants to strike fear into the heart of those who are naive or ignorant enough to believe him. This is all just white grievance politics wrapped up in toxic masculinity. And we're going to see more and more and more of this as white men continue to seek to control and dominate women and minorities and other at-risk groups. Instead of compassion and diplomacy or thinking about how to solve any problems, Abbott just stokes fear, and he paints immigrants, many of whom, by the way, are fleeing unimaginable violence for a better life in this country, which is a country built by immigrants, as criminals and victims. In stark contrast to this, we now remember Jimmy Carter, who was a president who led this country with empathy and actually understood that kindness was a superpower. He passed away yesterday at the age of 100, and he demonstrated a different kind of leadership, one that was built on humility and decency and service. He actually understood these things in his bones. He didn't thrive on or even traffic in white grievance ever. He didn't fearmonger. And he actually believed that it was better for all of us to build people up instead of tearing them down. This is what Donald had to say about Carter's death and legacy. I have to admit, though, I'm very skeptical that Donald wrote them. So I take all of this with several pounds of salt. Quote, the first one: those of us that have been fortunate to have served as president understand this is a very exclusive club, and only we can relate to the enormous responsibility of leading the greatest nation in history, unquote. Okay, he definitely didn't write that. But because those who do write his posts understand that basic human decency kind of gives away the game, that Donald didn't write the tweet. This followed the first post. Quote, while I strongly disagree with Carter philosophically and politically, I also realize that he truly loved and respected our country and all it stands for. Warmest condolences from Melania and I to his wonderful family. Exclamation point. Well, again, he didn't write either of those, but the idea that he could, or whoever is his ghostwriter, could just write something nice without having to get into the so-called philosophical and political differences between him and Carter's ridiculous. By the way, back then, I think Donald was a Democrat and probably voted for Carter. So Carter lived his life in stark contrast to many of America's leaders. Now, unlike Donald and Greg Abbott, Carter didn't need power to validate his masculinity. Instead, he found strength and humility and his love of humankind. His legacy reminds us that leadership doesn't have to be cruel or divisive or rooted in fear of losing power. His life also reminds us that true strength isn't found in dominance or control, but in compassion and caring for others. It's a stark contrast to the plutocracy and the machismo that we see in Donald and his MAGA cult followers and conservative Republicans, or let's just call them what they are, fascist Republicans who are in politics today. In fact, it looks like Jimmy Carter's breed of masculinity has lost, and we are currently being led by a bunch of men who just are drowning in toxic masculinity. These are misogynists. They have a completely un-American, anti-democratic perspective, and they thrive. They can only thrive on fear and division. Carter tried to do things differently. So I think we need to honor his legacy by rejecting the toxic narratives being spun by Donald, Elon Musk, Greg Abbott, and their ilk, and embracing the kind of leadership that lifts us all. I just hope we have an opportunity.